from Kentuckians, that's not the case. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to share two stories with you. I have a 30-year-old self-employed farmer. He had a major medical plan of $2,500 deductible and paid 80%. He paid $122.17 a month. This plan was canceled. To get a plan now with a $6,000 deductible and pays 80%, it is $259.02 a month. But it will cover pediatric, dental, and maternity, and he's an individual bachelor self-employed. He's single and a male. His point is, I had a plan, I liked it, the president said I could keep it. That was a lie. I also want to share, this is Tara, Eric, and Kai Manzano. They are both employed with a son. Their premium is doubling. They aren't sure how they'll be able to save for college for Kai and pay for this insurance. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to tell the stories of real people in Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District who are being hurt by Obamacare. Many of them have seen their work hours reduced. Others are seeing their premiums double, triple, and quadruple. Many are losing the health insurance plans they would like to keep and wondering why President Obama told them repeatedly that that would never happen. One single mom in Little Rock told me that her current health insurance plan will be canceled at the end of the year in just 6 weeks. She's worried this will affect her daughter, who's about to start graduate school. Terry and his wife in Rosebud, Arkansas, will see their premium rise from $380 to more than $1,000 per month. That's not affordable. And Daniel Hanley, here with his horse, a vet in Little Rock, received this notification that his health insurance plan was being canceled because of Obamacare. Quote, the cancellation notice says Obamacare will ultimately prevent us from offering competitive medical insurance. As a result, we anticipate that your medical insurance policy will be ending effective midnight, December 31st, 2013, end quote. It's clear that Obamacare is a broken law, and its broken website is only the beginning. Obamacare must be repealed so we can pass real patient-centered health care reform. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, a constituent emailed my office this morning, and then she followed up with a call. She is fed up with Obamacare. She is battling cancer that requires travel to a neighboring state. She told me her health insurance was being canceled due to the President's health care law. She was able to find a new plan, but will no longer be able to see her cancer doctor in Little Rock. She said, my doctor and I are very concerned about the future treatment if I have to change docs. How many other Americans can no longer go to the treatment centers they need for life-saving care? This is absurd. I have decided to continue my life-saving treatments in Little Rock, but will likely go bankrupt in the process. Just a little more stress the Obama plan has placed on thousands of Americans undergoing life-saving treatment. I am angry, not only for myself, but for everyone else who is going through this. Mr. Speaker, we need to honor the promise President Obama made to the millions of Americans who like their plans but are now receiving cancellation notices. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
Pass unanimous consent to speak to the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I want you to meet Andrew Parks, a hard-working young man from Bossier City, Louisiana, who's been hammered twice by Obamacare. Earlier this year, his employer did what so many other businesses were forced to do by the Obamacare employer mandate. They reduced Andrew's hours from a nearly 40-hour work week to 26 hours a week. He suffered a substantial loss in pay. Then the other shoe dropped. His employer recently sent him this notice from a national firm that his health insurance would not meet Obamacare standards and would be discontinued at the end of the year. His ordeal couldn't be much worse. Andrew has fought through a long-term illness and is a survivor of cancer. Yet all he's asked for is the opportunity to work hard, to earn a living, and to keep his health insurance that he could afford. But all Obamacare has done is make those goals much more difficult to reach. Obamacare is damaging our economy and harming individuals. It needs to be repealed, and repealed now. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and rise and send my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituents are asking a simple question, and the question they're asking the White House is, can you hear us now? Can you hear us now? And do you understand this frustration that we feel? I've got a constituent, Mr. Speaker, Diane, who got this letter from her insurance carrier with this couple of sentences. Effective January 1st, all plans must be compliant with the new health care law. Therefore, the insurance company plan you have now will no longer be available after December 31st. So what happened to Diane? A plan that she liked, a plan that she was satisfied with as an 11-year cancer survivor, a plan that she could afford, now was taken away based on Obamacare, and she was, quote, migrated into Obamacare, and her premium was nearly doubling. What does Diane have to say about President Obama's offer to fix this? She said this, I want to see legislation passed to fix this problem, legislation I can trust. I don't want an administrative trust. I don't trust that to anyone. We need to fix this. We need to pass this legislation. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise, and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, needs to be repealed and replaced with better legislation. There is no administrative or legislative fix that will repair this flawed law. Millions of Americans across the United States are receiving notices that their health insurance plans are being canceled. Jeff is a constituent of mine in San Antonio, Texas. His current insurance company sent him a notice informing him that his coverage will be canceled at the end of the year. The new Obamacare policy will cost 98% more than his current plan. After the administration's announcement today, Jeff and his family may be able to keep their health care insurance coverage, but only for 1 year and at what cost. We need to replace Obamacare with common-sense solutions that lower cost, expand access to care, and eliminate unfair mandates and penalties.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Yes, unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Americans we're discussing today did nothing wrong. They purchased insurance before any federal mandate ordered them to. Now they are losing their insurance. Katie Rupert is a constituent of mine. At 33, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, a sickness that later spread to her brain. She started radiation and travels to Houston to see her oncology specialist. Today, she is a stage 4 cancer survivor and doing well, but she knows that this will not last forever. Katie had good coverage through her husband's workplace, but is losing it because of Obamacare. What's worse, she's been told that her doctors are not covered by her options on the Obamacare exchanges. She is a wife, a mother, an inspiration, and now she is another example of this law's collateral damage. That's the impact of Obamacare. We can do better. We have to do better. We owe Katie and others like her at least that much. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. Without objection and pursuant to Clause 11 of Rule 1, the Chair removes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Graves, as a conferee on H.R. 3080 and appoints the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, to fill the vacancy. The clerk will notify the Senate of the change in conferees. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to change the tenor a little bit and do a little switching, although I must confess that there's not much more important in this country than trying to make sure that citizens have access to quality, comprehensive health care. And I think that we are much closer to that than we have ever been, and look forward to it actually happening. As I was listening, I was reminded of something that my father used to tell us, that if you keep telling yourself the same thing over and over and over and over again, you will eventually get to the point where you believe it. Being here to do a special order, though, reminds me of my good friend, Representative Major Owens, who was famous for doing special orders. I remember when I first came here that you could see Representative Major Owens on the floor late at night by himself talking about education and the need to make sure it happened. And I guess the fact that he was a trained librarian may have had something to do with that. So I wanted to just take a moment and pay tribute to Representative Major Owens for the tremendous work that he did on education, and especially the work that he did that led to the creation of something called PBIs, predominantly black institutions, as a part of the Higher Education Act. And so, Major, many students will remember your contribution to the development of what we know as these 75 or so institutions across the country that are called predominantly black institutions, and who now receive special consideration for funds because of that designation. I also, before I delve into my subject, want to express condolences to the family of Commissioner DeVera Beverly, who passed away earlier this week and is known as probably the most profound advocate for public housing and public housing residents in the city of Chicago, and perhaps throughout the nation, because she has spent more than 30 years advocating for this population group and was a founding member of the Public Housing Museum, which is well on its way to being developed. And so we express condolences to the family, friends, and associates of Commissioner DeVera Beverly, who lived in the Abla homes in Chicago. That's A-B-L-A, Abla homes. Some people call it Abla and others call it Abla. But she was a public housing resident who advocated to the point of being selected by the mayor of the city of Chicago to be a commissioner of the Chicago Housing Authority. So we salute you, Ms. DeVera Beverly. And now I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, but it's also near and dear to the hearts of many. And it's also part of a crisis that actually exists in our country. Our country is known for many things, as it should be. It's one of the, and perhaps the wealthiest country on the face of the earth. It's one of the most technologically proficient countries in the world today. It's one of the most highly educated countries. But it also is the country that has the distinction of having more people incarcerated, both per capita and in actual numbers, than any other country on the face of the earth. More than 2.3 million people sit tonight in our prisons throughout America. About 750,000 of those come home every year. And you know, of all the individuals who are incarcerated, most of them will come home, or they will go to somewhere. There are numbers of individuals who do, in fact, die in prison. They are lifers. And in many instances, they are individuals who have committed horrible crimes, sadistic crimes, crimes that suggest they should never be let out on their own. But most individuals will return home, or they will return to some community. And when they do, what happens to and with them will often determine whether or not they remain on the outside or how soon they will return to the inside. There are some things that we know about this population. We know that if they do not receive any help, many of them, about 2/3, within a 3-year period of time will have done what we call recidivate, which means that they will have committed some offense for which they could be rearrested and reincarcerated. And about 50% of them within 3 years, if nothing happens to or with them, if they don't get any help, will be back in jail or prison, costing the public money, living and being cared for at taxpayer expense. In some instances, these costs have become so high until some states are just looking for ways that they can release them, some of them, because in some instances they're spending as much money for corrections as they're spending for education. And that's an awful lot of money. But there is an alternative, and that alternative is called the Second Chance Act. And that's what I'm going to spend some time talking about. As a matter of fact, it was passed into law 5 years ago, signed by President Bush. So it's not a Democratic piece of action. It's not a Republican. It's a joint legislative initiative that had bipartisan, bicameral support, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, passed. And the interesting thing about it is that all of the reports that we have seen, and there have been a number of them, the Justice Center has put out a report called Reentry matters. Other groups have issued reports. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And the reports that I have seen all suggest that while it has not been a panacea, meaning that it certainly has not been able to solve all of the problems or diminish all of the issues surrounding this need, it has in fact been very helpful. And there are states who are reporting reductions in recidivism. And recidivism is one of the factors which contribute to keeping the numbers of people incarcerated as high as it is. Because for many of them, they're constantly in and out, and it becomes a cycle of going in and a cycle of getting out and going in again. But what helps them is when there are programmatic approaches, evidence-based, that actually help them. And we've had about 600 such programs and grants that have been funded under the Second Chance Act. Of course, it has not been as much money or as much funding as would be needed, but 600 groups across the nation, 600 institutions, 600 research groups, all working towards finding a solution and finding help, has made a difference. It's time now to reintroduce this legislation. And I am pleased and delighted that on yesterday, in both the House and the Senate, very senior level and prestigious members of both bodies have introduced, and we have seen the reintroduction of the Second Chance Act. In the Senate, Senator Leahy, Chairman of Judiciary, Senator Rob Portman, Democrat, Republican. In the House, Representative Jim Sensenbrenner, former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Republican. Myself, Democrat. And so we have Democrats and Republicans on this issue. There are a lot of things that we are not necessarily agreeing upon right now in Congress. There is a tremendous amount of disagreement, enough that actually shut down the government. But on this issue, there appear to be the emergence of tremendous agreement, which makes all of us optimistic that something significant and even more significant can be done. So I want to highlight some of the organizations and groups who have been actively engaged and seriously involved. Groups like the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, groups like the Justice Center from the Council of State Governments, groups who have worked assiduously to demonstrate that people can be helped. What is it that individuals need actually when they are released from jail or prison? Well, they certainly need more than $20 and a bus ticket. Many of them have no place at all to go. But if they can find somebody waiting in some community that says, we're going to help you get reestablished, we're going to help you find a place to live, a place that you can call your own. Or if you've got a drug problem, we're going to find you a source of treatment. Or maybe you're in need of anger management help. We're going to find someone who can provide. Perhaps you don't have much in the way of formal education and skill, so maybe we will direct you to a GED program, or maybe we will direct you to a vocational or technical training program so that you can develop the skill that you need in order to find a job or to secure employment. Then maybe you've got some emotional, psychological, or just self-esteem problems. Maybe we can direct you to a program that will help you overcome these deficiencies. And I can tell you that if these individuals can find a job, a place to work, a place where they know that they can fit and make a contribution, many of them will never, ever see the inside of a jail or prison again, because they have evolved into a person who know that they have self-worth, self-esteem, that they can take care of themselves, they can earn what they need, and they can make a contribution. But I can tell you there are many barriers that often prohibit and prevent individuals from finding their rightful place or being able to successfully re-enter society as a contributing member. For example, you may not be able to live in public housing if you have a felony conviction. You could just very well be barred. Well, who needs public housing more than individuals who can't find a job? There are many entities within our society that say to an individual with a record, we don't hire people with records. Meaning, if you've been convicted of a felony, there's no point to making an application, even if we have help wanted signs posted. Fortunately, there are some businesses and some companies who are beginning to ease up a little bit and see the futility of that kind of policy, because if these individuals are never able to find a job, they will be a cost to the public the rest of their natural lives. Somebody's tax dollars will have to go to support them in one way or the other. So some state legislatures are beginning to look at some of the licensing requirements that their states have and say maybe you can't get a license to be a barber or a beautician or cosmetologist, yet you were able to get trained while incarcerated, and now that you've been trained, you cannot work in that profession. Of course, that does not appear to be very logical, and so some states are beginning to review their policies as it relates to certain kinds of licensure requirements and whether or not individuals can get what might be called a waiver, or whether they can demonstrate that not only do they have the training and expertise to do the job, but they also have the character which will allow them to do it well. And so a little bit of progress is being made in that direction. There are some instances where housing authorities are beginning to look to see whether or not there might be some way. And I don't think anybody is suggesting, when they're being asked to provide opportunity, certainly you wouldn't necessarily put a child molester in a daycare center. And many of the programs and many of the individuals who try and help erase some of the barriers, they already know that. And that's not the kind of thing that they advocate. But they do believe that people should be given a chance, an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate that they want to be good citizens, that they want to work, that they want to contribute. And so I'm asking my colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, to look at the invitation letters that they have received to become co-sponsors of this legislation. It's not asking for as much money as it needs. $100 million is money, but it does not break the bank. That's the appropriation ask. But I think one of the things that we look at is what it has spawned and what it has sparked, not just how much federal money has gone into it, not just how many federal dollars, but it has spawned response and reaction from state, local, and county governments who have established their own second chance programs, who have put together their own second chance initiatives. And I certainly want to commend both the governor of the state of Illinois, my governor, who, by the way, happens to live in my congressional district and is my constituent, but my governor, Patrick Quinn, for the state of Illinois' response to this problem. I want to commend and congratulate the president of our Cook County government county board, which of course is larger than more than 25 states in the nation, the county of Cook, a very large county with more than 5 million people in it. I want to commend President Tony Preckwinkle for how the county government is trying to respond to this need. And especially, I want to commend the sheriff of our county, who has more than 13,000 people in his jail, and he recognizes that many of them ought not be there because they've got mental health problems and mental health issues, and he is seeking and searching and looking for ways to change that. And I want to commend the mayor of the city of Chicago, our former colleague, Rahm Emanuel, because he has established a number of programs with city agencies and with city government where they are set aside specifically for individuals who have records, individuals who've been incarcerated, individuals who need a second chance with both the city of Chicago itself and the Chicago Transit Authority. So there's bits and pieces of progress being made, and I commend all of those who are helping to make it. But my final ask is for my colleagues in both the House and the Senate to join in this effort, sign on to the Second Chance Act, help us to get it renewed, help us to get it reauthorized, to get it refunded, and get it seriously implemented throughout the United States of America so that these individuals will know that our country does in fact believe in a second chance. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
I ask that the members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks in order for us to submit. Very good. Mr. Speaker, my fellow colleagues, I want to share with you a picture that I have in my office, and it's my favorite picture. It's the famous picture of President and then General George Washington on his knees praying at Valley Forge. And of course, we all remember from our history lessons the story of what happened during that time. But the winter of Valley Forge was a terrible, trying time for the Continental Army. They had suffered a lot of defeats that fall, and they went into a very cold, harsh winter with very, very limited supplies. And the stories that come from that are just heartbreaking. There's 12,000 men that were encamped. Many of them did not even have a tent or a shelter. Several of them did not even have a blanket. And as you know, here in Washington, D.C. and back home in Missouri, the weather has started to turn cold, and I think it was like 30 degrees this morning. And to think about what it would have been like to have to sleep out in the cold with no blanket during that time, and of course snow came along. And we have heard stories about how many of the men did not even have shoes. They had marched so much that fall and had gone through such harsh battles that their shoes had fallen apart. And we've all seen pictures and heard stories of how their feet bled even in the snow. There were foot tracks like that. And what's worse, many of them didn't even have food. And this was the situation of 12,000 men, such that the conditions were so bad that they ruled at one time that a third of that, or almost 4,000 men, were unfit for battle. And then 2,000 over the course of those winter months died as a result of the disease and dysentery and other things that occurred during those very harsh conditions. And during that time, we have learned a story that George Washington, the commander of this ragtag but yet valiant group of men, went to the woods and got down on his knees and prayed. And the reason we know that is because the story of Isaac Potts later shared the account that was recorded, that he was a local Quaker farmer, and he was riding his horse through the woods, and he heard a sound that was strange, as if a man was crying out in plaintive prayer. And so he quietly got off his horse and wrapped the reins around a sapling tree, snuck through the woods to get closer, and came into that opening. He could see something that shocked him. And he said it like this. He said, "I saw the great George Washington on his knees alone, with his sword on one side and his cocked hat on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching to interpose for his divine aid." And we know what later happened, and I believe as a result of those prayers. That ragtag group of army over the winter gained courage and strength. They started, supplies started to come in. We had a General Baron von Steuben that was sent by Benjamin Franklin from the Prussian army to start drilling the men and turn this ragtag but courageous group of men into a major, strong fighting force. And they came out that next spring a force ready to meet the British Army, and they did. And that was a turning point in the war. It wasn't to be decided for years to come, but at Valley Forge, the whole outcome of not just the war, but of our country was turned. And I believe because of the prayer of the general of the Army. You know, faith has been important to the armed services and to people of this country from the beginning. And it is just as important now to our men and women in uniform as it was back at the beginning of our country. But yet their ability to express their religious beliefs is being attacked from forces outside and forces within. And it's been discouraging the last few years to hear accounts of some of these infringements on the basic religious rights and freedoms of our men and women in uniform. And so that's why my colleagues and I are here for the next hour, is to first of all stand up for the religious rights and freedoms that are guaranteed in our Constitution. I think it's very fitting and appropriate to remember that George Washington was there and helped craft those basic rights and Bill of Rights, and they put as the first right the freedom of expression of religion. And we want to not only celebrate that and stand up for that, but to also raise awareness of the concerns that we have and to implore the Department of Defense to push back on some of the negative policies that have been coming out that infringe on their rights, and to change course and to continue to remain strong as a country, preserving those basic freedoms so that we can continue to be strong in the future as we have in the past. And so right now I want to invite someone who knows from very personal experience and can speak to this issue, and that's my friend from Georgia, Representative Doug Collins, who is still an active member of the Air Force Reserves, not only serving his country in many ways, but also serving his God from being a chaplain. So, Representative Collins, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this very important issue.
Well, I appreciate the gentlelady yielding and being a part of this tonight and really bringing something to the forefront that we need to discuss. It is a part of our foundation. It is a part, as you have so rightly shown by that wonderful reproduction of a painting there, that our values and our foundings were founded really on a sense of prayer. And not from a prayer that led to an exclusive nation, but a prayer that led to an inclusive nation. And I think that's something that we are often many times forgotten in this process. But tonight, as we talk about this, I want to discuss it on Veterans Day. The President laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. As the final resting place for so many men and women of faith, Arlington is understandably full of religious symbolism. It is considered this country's most hallowed ground. Veterans Day gives Americans an opportunity to honor those laid to rest at Arlington Cemetery, along with those who are continuing to serve our great nation. You see, those interned at Arlington's soil gave their life to uphold the rights we are blessed to enjoy today. Sadly, I have become concerned about our service members' ability to exercise their freedoms. Over the past year, a number of incidents have caused many to question if the Pentagon and the VA no longer embrace the religious freedoms of its soldiers and the patients who have bled to defend. A news report came to light just a few days ago of 2 military chaplains being harassed in a Veterans Affairs chaplain training program in 2012. The VA health programs employ chaplains to minister to patients receiving care, and these 2 seasoned officers were looking to attend to the needs of those in VA care. Now, I want you to understand, these are not new chaplains. These are not new to the military environment. These were 2 who had admirably served in the military as chaplains and gone through this training, which should have been easy because it had been something they had been doing their entire career. However, their suit claims a VA supervisor repeatedly harassed the chaplains about their Christian beliefs. The supervisor instructed the chaplains not to pray in the name of Jesus, which is an integral component of the Christian faith, even in the context of group discussions on faith-based topics. The 2 chaplains were chastised for reciting Scripture. As a chaplain myself, I'm just amazed at this process at this point. Chaplains not able to use Scripture, of any chaplain, of any faith group. That is the very basis of who we are, no matter what faith background that we come from. And in ministering to those with faith or without faith, it is a structural part of who we are. The chaplain's spiritual beliefs were belittled on multiple occasions. The harassments by the chaplain supervisor were so visceral that one of them withdrew from the program. The VA is designed to serve members of the armed forces during periods of need and hardship. If the VA bars chaplains from expressing themselves, how can we expect service members suffering from private illnesses to come forward? Unfortunately, this is not an isolated event. There are numerous reports of the DoD and VA permitting open hostility to Christian organizations and those practicing the faith in uniform. In April, media sources reported that Army soldiers were being briefed that Christian evangelicals were to be considered extremist organizations in the vein of Al-Qaeda. Similar briefings have apparently continued with a similar incident at Camp Shelby in Alabama. Catch this, not a few months ago, not when this was first done, last month. As one who is a Christian evangelical, to be described with those in an terrorist organization on the vein of Al-Qaeda is despicable and should be stopped. Earlier this year, the Southern Baptist Convention's website had issues at Army, Navy, and Air Force and Marine bases. There were issues that were subsequently apologized for, and there was never an intent to restrict service members' access to the site. But when you look at it from an overall perspective, this just still continues to be a concern. And then we get a gentleman named Mickey Weinstein, who is an ardent critic of Christians practicing in the military. Mr. Weinstein heads the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, but don't let the title of his organization fool you. That's what they want you to think. Mr. Weinstein believes that the phrase, "So help me God," should be removed from the Air Force Academy's honor oath. The same man requested and received time to speak with top military brass to discuss religious freedom in the military. At what point in time should someone who wants to take away military freedom be given the opportunity to go before our highest military officials to plead a case to remove a very constitutional right without the benefit of others giving the same courtesy? As I continue reflecting on the meeting of Veterans Day, it troubles my spirit to think that leading military personnel may be targeting Christian organizations as a part of a personal agenda. This country has fought such tyrants. Freedom of religion has been upheld with the blood, sweat, and tears of the U.S. military. Now there appears to be a strain inside the Pentagon and the VA whose mission it is to take away the soul of our fighting force. Are we now to tiptoe on the very soil that entombs the brave men and women who gave their lives for religious liberties and our other constitutional rights? As a military chaplain myself, I pray not. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, President Collins. Well said. And, you know, the oath that you talk about, I wanted to expound on it just a little bit so people understood that what Mikey Weinstein did has had an effect. That the Air Force Academy actually removed a poster portraying the words of the Academy oath, and the committee is considered removing the phrase, "So help me God," from the honor oath recited by all incoming cadets. Now, and this is the same oath, and let me read it. This is the oath that now every cadet gives when they come into the Air Force Academy. It's also the same oath of office for officers, and it's the same oath that members of Congress say. This is what they want to remove, the "So help me God." It's here we go. I, having been appointed as Air Force cadet in the United States Air Force, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of which I am about to enter, so help me God. It's a time-honored oath. This is a serious decision to enter the service to the country, whether it's in the military or whether it's a member of Congress, and to have them question whether we should remove that or not is despicable. So now I'd like to turn to a champion on these issues, and that's my friend from Colorado, Representative Doug Lamborn, and I appreciate the letters that he has authored to push back on many of these attacks to our religious freedoms. So go ahead, Representative Lamborn.
Well, I thank the gentlelady from Missouri. I know that she is a leader on military issues. We served together on the Armed Services Committee, and she's becoming more known as a leader on military issues. And her passion on religious freedom is also evident through her getting this time here today, so I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, I rise today again in support of religious freedom in our military. I am honored to represent tens of thousands of men and women in uniform who serve at the 5 military installations in my district in Colorado. Our military is made up of brave and dedicated men and women of all faiths who deserve to practice their respective religious freedom free from harassment and malicious attacks. But there is a growing and troubling pattern of religious discrimination against our men and women in arms. Earlier this year, an Army Reserve training brief listed Catholics, evangelical Christians, Sunni Muslims, and some Jews as religious extremists, along with groups like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and the KKK. In response to this troubling report, I sent a letter along with 34 of my colleagues to the Secretary of the Army to express deep concern and to request information about what is being done to prevent this sort of offensive briefing from being given again. In his response, Secretary of the Army John McHugh assured us that this briefing was an isolated incident. Secretary McHugh also made a note of a corrective measure that would require all briefings of this nature to be vetted with the appropriate unit leaders and subject matter experts prior to presentation. Sadly, this past month, reports of additional offensive Army briefings came to light. First at Camp Shelby in Mississippi, where an Army Reserve training brief listed the American Family Association, a respected Christian organization, as a domestic hate group alongside groups like the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, the Black Panthers, and the Nation of Islam. And also at a Fort Hood briefing that listed Christian evangelical groups as a threat to the United States. These disturbing reports have made clear that the offensive briefing given in April was not an isolated incident. This pattern must be addressed. I was encouraged to learn that Secretary McHugh, after learning of the most recent incidents, issued an order to cease all briefings on the subject of extremist organizations and activities. Secretary McHugh rightly described the mislabeling of Christian evangelical groups as, quote, inaccurate, objectionable, and otherwise inconsistent with current Army policy, unquote. I commend Secretary McHugh's recent action and believe it was a step in the right direction. However, these Army briefings are small examples of what I believe is a larger issue, which is a pattern of intolerance toward people of faith in the military. In addition to briefings mislabeling Christians, we have also seen a Christian chaplain ordered to remove a religious column he had written, which simply detailed the history of the phrase, "There are no atheists in foxholes." Active efforts are underway to remove the phrase, "So help me God," from the Air Force Academy oath. The President, upon signing the National Defense Authorization Act, actually called religious freedom protections for military chaplains and other service members, quote, unnecessary and ill-advised, unquote. I have no idea how he could say this. Mr. Speaker, this religious intolerance is unacceptable. Our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, but has always believed in freedom of self-expression and intolerance. We owe it to our men and women in uniform to defend these basic rights. Religious freedom is an integral component of America's greatness and has been a pillar of our nation from the very beginning. You can see the picture that Representative Hartzell showed of George Washington. And it has also been a strong part of our military heritage. We must remain firmly committed to defending that freedom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to the gentlelady from Missouri.
Thank you, Representative Lamborn. That was very good, and I appreciate all the summary of some of the concerns that we have and the pattern that is developed in the intolerance in the military of religious expression. So thank you for your leadership on that. Now I'd like to turn to my friend from Texas, Representative Roger Williams. Yield time to him.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Appreciate your leadership. Mr. Speaker, in our nation's 237 years, over 25 million men and women have served in the armed forces. They wear the uniform, fight our enemies, defend their homeland, protect their fellow man in battle, honor their fallen comrades, and perhaps most importantly, they honor their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Mr. Speaker, the First Amendment of the Constitution states Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Freedom of religion is how we live our faith, not just where we attend worship services. Soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines stationed domestically are able to attend their religious services. And for troops overseas who aren't able to walk off base in an enemy territory to attend a service, there are military chaplains who facilitate services for them. But religious freedom doesn't just cover worship services. It covers the exercise of religion. Regrettably, in the last few years, many instances of religious intolerance in the military have come to light, specifically targeting Christianity. Soldiers are being told by superiors that they cannot associate themselves with Christian groups and that evangelical Christians are a threat to the United States. These soldiers are told not to associate with, contribute to, or be a part of these Christian groups. This is not only an outrage, it is un-American and a direct violation of the Constitution that these men and women have sworn with their lives to uphold. Troops do not take an oath to their superiors, the President, the government, or to Congress. They take an oath to defend the Constitution, which protects their religious liberty. The Department of Defense rules and regulations protecting these rights need to be enforced. As a whole, the military overwhelmingly respects the rights and religious beliefs of individuals. But these so-called isolated incidences of intimidation and coercion must end now and immediately. Mr. Speaker, our armed forces are willing and ready to answer the call of duty, and so many have made the ultimate sacrifice to preserve the freedoms and liberties we as Americans value so dearly. My district, the 25th District of Texas, is home to Fort Hood, the largest military installation in America. The patriots at Fort Hood deserve to have someone fighting on their behalf when their rights as Americans are violated. Congress must ensure that every time a man or woman makes the admirable decision to join the military, they are not signing away their First Amendment rights. Let's make sure right here, right now, that our policies have no room for interpretation when it comes to the military's right to freely practice their religion. After all, we are one nation under God. In God, we always trust. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Williams. Well said. Appreciate it very much. Now I'd like to yield time to the real leader on this, who's been at the forefront of ensuring that our men and women in uniform are not discriminated against based on their religious beliefs. And he was the author of the amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act last year and this year, protecting those freedoms. And now I'd like to turn to John Fleming from Louisiana.
I thank the gentlelady from Missouri, and thank you for your leadership, and also tonight for having this great time for us to come together and talk about a subject that I think is increasingly important. With great foresight and clarity, the Founding Fathers enshrined religious liberty as our First Amendment right, stating, "The Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or impeding the free exercise thereof." This is an important constitutional right that is for every American, including service members who defend those very liberties with their own lives. The ability to live one's life informed by one's faith is not just a protected constitutional right. It's also essential for the individual well-being of our soldiers. In the uniquely stressful military environment, Congress must ensure that our men and women in uniform can access religious support and practice their faith without risking career reprisals. Service members increasingly fear even mentioning their faith in the military because of restrictions, uncertain policies surrounding religious expression, and a general climate of hostility towards those with particular religious or moral viewpoints. This is not your father's military. This is not the military you served in. This is a different military when it comes to respecting religious rights and freedoms. Last year, the House Armed Services Committee adopted an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 533, that provided protections of sincerely held religious beliefs for service members and chaplains. However, we have yet to see the regulations that should have been issued in accordance with this amendment. In March 2013, JAG memorandum, the Air Force clearly showed that it is interpreting 533 as only protecting the religious belief of service members and not the actual expression of those beliefs through actions and free speech. Well, for heaven's sakes, of course the military can't say anything about what you believe, because nobody knows what you believe unless you express those beliefs in some way or another. Just as the First Amendment does not mean just freedom of worship, but rather it is the free exercise of religion, service members are not only protected in holding a belief, but are free to live their lives in accordance with those beliefs and give voice to them. This June, on a bipartisan basis, the House Armed Services Committee adopted my amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to clarify the protections provided for actions and speech that flow from sincerely held religious and moral convictions. My amendment provides the Department flexibility to ensure the morale and readiness needs of service members are met upon the application of this provision. It clarifies that action and speech, along with the beliefs of a service member, are protected by the First Amendment, and it requires that DoD consult with faith groups which already work with military to endorse military chaplains when implementing Section 533. While the military context requires good order and discipline to be maintained, good order and discipline cannot be wielded as a club to stifle reasonable religious expression of service members. So what am I really talking about here? Well, let me give you some examples. A service member received a severe and possibly career-ending reprimand from his commanding officer for respectfully expressing his faith's religious position in a personal religious blog, even though the blog included a disclaimer that his views were not official military policy. An Air Force officer kept a Bible on his desk, along with other personal items, for 18 years. When he transferred to his latest assignment, he was told by his supervisor that he could not keep his Bible in public view, that it may offend someone if they actually saw his Bible. Walter Reed Hospital briefly prohibited the distribution of religious materials, i.e. Bibles and Scripture of any faith, from being given to wounded service members. Thousands of Army Reserve soldiers received equal opportunity training, labeling evangelical Christians, Catholics, ultra-Orthodox Jews, and others as religious extremists comparable to the KKK and Al-Qaeda. This training, which was memorized in writing, further instructed the service members that they may not support such extremist organizations. By attending meetings, fundraising, recruiting, helping lead or organize, or distributing literature. In other words, thousands of soldiers were told that they could not go to church, lead Sunday school, tithe, share their faith, or give out Bibles. Another series of equal opportunity training sessions held for Army active components at Camp Shelby in Alabama and again at Fort Hood in Texas listed a prominent ministry, the American Family Association, as an extremist group alongside the KKK. I am pleased that Secretary McHugh, upon being made aware of these particular types of egregious training materials, canceled all future equal opportunity training until the DoD gets its act together. There's the case of Sergeant Monk, a fine young man that I met personally, who was relieved of his position after objecting to his commander's plans to punish an instructor who had expressed religious objections to gay marriage. When asked about his own support of traditional marriage, Sergeant Monk was told that he was in violation of Air Force policy Yes, because he supported traditional marriage, he was in violation of Air Force policy. And after 19 years, almost 20 years, almost reaching retirement, he was fired. In performing his official duties, an Air Force chaplain, Lieutenant Colonel Reyes, at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska, wrote a column on the Chaplain's Corner. It's a website titled "No Atheist in Foxholes. Chaplains Gave All in World War II," end quote. The column traces the history of the famous phrase used by President Eisenhower and connects it to the idea that the military is unique and that service members must confront the grim reality of death. He writes, "Everyone expresses some form of faith every day, whether it's religious or secular. Some express faith by believing when they get up in the morning they will arrive at work in one piece. What is the root or object of your faith? Is it something you can count on in times of plenty or loss, peace or chaos, joy or sorrow, success or failure? What is faith to you?" And finally, the column did not speak negatively of people of faith or people of non-faith. Though the commander removed the column from the Chaplain's Corner webpage, the commander later reposted the column after media attention and congressional inquiries. So I would just like to say in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, that we are seeing assault on religious liberty, not just religion, not just Christianity, but religious liberty in a way this nation has never seen before. And bear in mind, why did our forefathers, why did our ancestors come to this nation? Well, for different reasons: economic freedom, freedom of speech and other things, but primarily for religious freedom, and that is the one freedom that appears to be slipping away in the most important venue that we have, and that is in the military. Because who pays a heavier price for that freedom than our uniformed members who stand in the gap, who protect us each and every day in our own freedoms? And with that, I yield back, and I thank the young lady.
Thank you so much, Representative. Your leadership has really made a difference, and appreciate your comments. And I know another colleague from Texas who is a captain in the Army, probably has a few things to share about